June 10, 1990, British Airways Flight 5390 is climbing past 17,000 feet over Oxfordshire, England. It's a routine Sunday morning flight from Birmingham to Malaga, Spain. The seatbelt sign goes off. Flight attendants start preparing the drink carts. And then, a sound like a cannon shot shatters the calm. In less than a second, the cockpit becomes a chaotic wind tunnel of freezing fog and debris. The co-pilot looks to his left, and his reality breaks. The captain's chair is empty. The captain is outside the plane. We trust aviation because it is built on layers of redundancy. Every critical system has a backup. Every pilot action is governed by a checklist. It's a world designed to engineer out human error. But history shows us that chaos always finds the single point of failure. And when the impossible happens at 30,000 feet, the checklists are useless, and all that's left is raw human instinct. On Flight 5390, the point of failure was tragically simple. During a tired maintenance shift the night before, 84 bolts securing the captain's windscreen had been replaced. They were the wrong size, too small by hundredths of an inch. When the pressure differential became too great, the window simply blew out. Captain Tim Lancaster was sucked torso first out of the cockpit. The explosive decompression slammed his upper body against the exterior of the fuselage. It was minus 17 degrees Celsius outside. The air was rushing past at over 350 miles an hour. Inside the cockpit, flight attendant Nigel Ogden acted on pure reflex. He grabbed the captain's belt just as Lancaster's legs snagged the control yoke, disengaging the autopilot and sending the jet into a steep dive. For 22 agonizing minutes, while the co-pilot fought to regain control and land, Ogden held on. He was battered by freezing winds, his arms stretching to the breaking point. The crew, looking at the rigid, battered body whipping against the window frame, assumed their captain was dead. They held on anyway, terrified that if they let go, his body would fly back and strike the tail engine, dooming them all. Yet, when they finally made an emergency landing in Southampton, Tim Lancaster was alive. He suffered terrible frostbite, fractures, and shock, but he survived being on the outside of a jet at altitude. He was flying again within 5 months, a living testament to sheer human stubbornness against the violence of physics. Sometimes, however, the threat isn't explosive chaos. Sometimes, it's a terrifying, creeping silence. 7 years earlier, on July 23, 1983, Air Canada Flight 143 was cruising at a serene 41,000 feet over Red Lake, Ontario. It was a brand new Boeing 767, one of the most advanced aircraft in the world at the time. Then, a warning buzzer sounded in the cockpit. Fuel pressure loss in the left engine. Moments later, another alarm. The right engine flamed out. The world's most sophisticated airliner had just become a 130-ton glider. The cause wasn't mechanical failure. It was a math error. Canada was in the messy process of converting from imperial to metric units. The ground crew had calculated the fuel load required in pounds, but the new jet's computer measured it in kilograms. They had launched with less than half the fuel required to reach their destination. As the engines died, the cockpit went dark. The modern glass cockpit instruments required electrical power generated by the engines. Captain Bob Pearson was left with little more than an airspeed indicator and an altimeter, piloting a silent behemoth dropping thousands of feet per minute. But Pearson had a secret weapon in his skill set that had nothing to do with flying jets. In his spare time, he was an experienced glider pilot. He knew he couldn't make the nearest major airport. He needed a landing spot. Fast. He aimed for a decommissioned Air Force base at Gimli, Manitoba, coming in too high and too fast. Pearson executed a maneuver called a forward slip. He crossed the controls, forcing the giant jet to fly sideways through the air like a crooked arrow, creating immense drag to drop altitude without gaining speed. It's a maneuver common in small Cessnas, but almost never attempted in a commercial airliner. As the silent 767 approached the ground, the crew realized with horror that the decommissioned runway had been converted. It was a drag racing strip, and today was race day. There were campers, families, and spectators lining the tarmac. Pearson dropped the landing gear. The nose wheel collapsed on impact. The massive jet skidded on its nose in a shower of sparks, grinding to a halt just hundreds of feet from terrified race fans. Miraculously, everyone on the ground and in the air walked away without major injury. Pilot skill saved the Gimli Glider. But 13 years earlier, during the height of the Cold War, a lack of pilot skill is exactly what saved the plane. February 2, 1970. First Lieutenant Gary Faust is in a high-stakes dogfight training exercise over Montana, flying a Convair F-106 Delta Dart, a fast, temperamental supersonic interceptor. At 35,000 feet, Faust pushes the aircraft too hard. The Delta Dart enters a flat spin. This is often a death sentence for a fighter pilot. The plane falls like a leaf, rotating violently around its center, unresponsive to controls. Faust tries every procedure in the book to break the spin. Nothing works. He's disoriented, losing altitude rapidly. At 15,000 feet, he accepts defeat. He pulls the ejection handle and blasts into the freezing air, watching his career drift away below him. But the mechanics of the ejection, the sudden shift in weight and center of gravity as the pilot and heavy seat left the cockpit, combined with the downward kick from the rocket motors, did something Faust couldn't. The physics perfectly counteracted the spin forces. As Faust descended under his parachute, he watched in utter disbelief as his empty fighter jet stabilized itself. It nosedived briefly, gained airspeed, and then leveled off into a gentle glide. The unmanned, nuclear-capable interceptor flew itself to a perfect belly, landing in a snowy cornfield near Big Sandy, Montana. The snow cushioned the impact so effectively that when the local sheriff arrived, the jet's engine was still running at idle power, and the aircraft was slowly creeping across the frozen field like a wounded animal. The Air Force simply repaired the belly skin and returned it to service, forever known as the Cornfield Bomber. We're halfway through these incredible stories of survival against the odds. If you're finding these accounts as gripping as we are, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps us continue the deep dive research needed to bring these lesser-known pieces of history to light. Now, we turn to a darker chapter, where the threat wasn't mechanical failure or the elements, but a betrayal from within. April 7, 1994, Memphis, Tennessee. FedEx Flight 705, a massive DC-10 cargo freighter, takes off bound for San Jose. On board are 3 crew members and 1 deadheading employee occupying the jump seat, Auburn Calloway. Calloway was a desperate man. Facing termination from FedEx for falsifying his resume, he had hatched a gruesome plan. He carried insurance policies worth millions, payable to his family only if he died in an accident. In his carry-on guitar case, he didn't have an instrument. He had hammers and spear guns. His plan was to incapacitate the crew with blunt force, to simulate injuries consistent with a plane crash, then dive the DC-10 into the ground. 20 minutes into the flight, Calloway attacked. He bludgeoned the crew with the hammers, fracturing the skulls of all 3 men in seconds. The cockpit became a scene of unimaginable brutality. Despite critical injuries and massive blood loss, Captain David Sanders and flight engineer Andy Peterson fought back, grappling with Calloway in the cramped galley area behind the cockpit. In the pilot's seat, First Officer James Tucker, struggling to remain conscious through the pain, realized his only weapon against the attacker was the plane itself. Tucker threw the heavy DC-10 into maneuvers it was never designed to withstand. He rolled the massive freighter upside down at 400 knots to knock the attacker off his feet. At one point, he put the cargo plane into a vertical dive faster than the speed of sound. The structural stress on the airframe was immense. By all rights, the wings should have snapped off, but the violent maneuvers bought the crew just enough time. They managed to subdue Calloway and, miraculously, land the battered and blood-soaked plane back in Memphis. That was a fight for survival carried out by highly trained professionals under extreme duress. Our final story is something else entirely. A modern enigma that blurs the line between intuitive skill, tragedy, and the surreal. On the evening of August 10, 2018, at SeaTac International Airport in Seattle, a Horizon Q400 turboprop sat empty on a maintenance ramp. Richard Russell, a 29-year-old ground service agent, a baggage handler with absolutely zero pilot training, used a pushback tractor to rotate the aircraft. He started the engines. He taxied onto an active runway and took off into the twilight sky. For the next hour and 13 minutes, the world watched live as a stolen 76-seat commercial airliner looped over the Puget Sound, chased by armed F-15 fighter jets. But it was the audio tapes between Russell and air traffic control that captivated the world. Russell wasn't a screaming terrorist. He sounded like a neighbor having a chat over the backyard fence. He joked with controllers. He commented on the beautiful view of the Olympic Mountains. He described himself sadly as just a broken guy with a few screws loose, and wondered aloud if Horizon Air would give him a job as a pilot if he managed to land the thing. Then, Russell did the impossible. Over the water, he took the large turboprop and performed a barrel roll. He pulled the nose up into a loop, rolled inverted at the top, and dove toward the water, pulling up just 10 feet above the surface before climbing back out. Veteran pilots watched the footage in stunned disbelief. The maneuver required an intuitive understanding of energy management and flight physics that usually takes years to master. Russell later admitted on the radio he had only picked it up from playing video games. The flight ended tragically on Ketron Island, a deliberate crash in a remote, wooded area. It remains one of aviation's most haunting mysteries, a moment where a regular person briefly unlocked the secrets of flight, only to use them for a final, desperate act. This story is just one of 5 we'll explore, spanning decades and involving fighter jets, massive cargo haulers, and passenger liners, but they all share a common, unsettling thread. We live in a world that feels increasingly automated, governed by predictable systems. We forget just how fragile that control really is, whether it's a missing bolt, a simple conversion error, or a broken human spirit. Chaos is always waiting just outside the pressurized cabin. These events are stark reminders that when the checklists fail and the screens go dark, all that's left is human instinct, resilience, and the terrifying, beautiful reality of physics. Thanks for watching.
Case closed on this chapter, but the world is full of unsolved questions. Join the investigation by subscribing now.